day came to the world in the usual way, but there were planes to catch and bills to pay. He learned to walk while I was away. He was talking for I knew it, and as he grew, he said, I'm gonna be like you, Dad. You know I'm gonna be like you. And the cat's in the cradle and the silver spoon, little boy blue and the man on the moon. When you're coming home, son, I don't know when we'll get together then. You know we'll have a good time then. Well, my son turned 10 just the other day. Said thanks for the ball, Dad, come on, let's play. Could you teach me to throw? I said, not today, I got a lot to do. He said, that's okay, and he walked away and he smiled and he said, you know, I'm gonna be like him, yeah. You know I'm gonna be like him. And the cat's in the cradle and the silver spoon, little boy blue and the man on the moon. When you're coming home, son, I don't know when we'll get together then. You know we'll have a good time then. Well, he came from college just the other day. So much like a man, I just had to say, I'm proud of you, could you sit for a while? He shook his head and he said with a smile, what I'm feeling like, Dad, is to borrow the car keys. See you later, can I have them, please? And the cat's in the cradle and the silver spoon, little boy blue and the man on the moon. When you're coming home, son, I don't know when we'll get together then. You know we'll have a good time then. Retired, my son's moved away. I called him up just the other day. I'd like to see you if you don't mind. He said I'd love to, Dad, if I could find the time. You see, my new job's a hassling the kids of the blue, but it's sure nice talking to you, Dad. It's been sure nice talking to you. And as I hung up the phone, it occurred to me, he'd grown up just like me. My boy was just like me. And the cat's in the cradle and the silver spoon, little boy blue and the man on the moon. When you're coming home, son, I don't know when we'll get together then. You know we'll have a good time then. And the cat's in the cradle and the silver spoon, little boy blue and the man on the moon. When you're coming home, son, I don't know when we'll get together then. You know we'll have a good time then.
I want to appeal to you for the last time. You don't know what you're talking about. I know this much. The sea is going to keep pouring in. We're going to keep settling deeper and deeper. We may even go under before we get up to the bottom to cut our way out. But it's something to try. It's a chance. We might make it. If you stay here, you'll certainly die. We are staying with the Mercer.
Couldn't talk anybody else into coming, huh?
No, we're on our own. All right, let's get inside. Get him inside! Get him!
The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitutes an invisible government, which is the true rule and power of our government. We are governed, our minds are moulded, our taste formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men we have never heard of. In almost every act of our daily lives, whether in the sphere of politics or business, in our social conduct or our ethical thinking, we are dominated by the relatively small number of persons who understand the mental processes and social patterns of the masses. It is they who pull the wires which control the public mind, who harness old social forces and to contrive new ways to bind and guide the world. This passage was written by Edward Bernays, the nephew of Sigmund Freud and the pioneering mind behind advertising, modern propaganda and the field of public relations. Bernays' influence was enormous. Relying heavily on the insights of his uncle, he developed highly successful manipulation techniques which are still used today not only by companies to sell consumer products but also by the powers that be, to the words of Bernays, control and regiment the masses. Let's explore some of Bernays' most intriguing ideas, paying particular attention to his insights on how group psychology can be used to control and manipulate the masses. In his classic work, Group Psychology and the Analysis of the Ego, Sigmund Freud described group psychology as being concerned with the individual man as a member of a race, of a nation, of a caste, of a profession or of an institute, or as a component part of a crowd of people who have been organized into a group at some particular time for some defined purpose. In other words, group psychology attempts to understand how an individual's behavior, thoughts and emotions change when becoming a part of a group. The tendency of human beings to form groups was selected for in our evolutionary past due to the survival benefits it offered. Ancient humans who organized into tribes were more likely to survive and reproduce in the harsh environments in which they lived. However, with the help of modern technologies, humans today have transformed the environment in a manner which renders the survival value of tribal organization obsolete. But with that said, the ancient and institutional pull of tribal organizations still looms large in the lives of most, with many people today identifying and hence stereotyping both themselves and others based on things such as the race, class, gender, nationality, religion, or the political party or ideology to which one adheres. This continued proclivity to engage in group identification is, according to Bernays, a function of the enlarged sense of self-importance that individuals derive from identifying with a potentially powerful mass. Just as the wolf pack is many times as strong as the combined strength of its individual members, so too the individual senses the potential power of the group, and it derives feelings of potency in identifying with it. Beginning in the late 19th century, a number of thinkers, most notably Freud and Gustav Le Bon, attempted to understand why people engage in group identification and how group identification affects one's mind and behaviour. As Bernays noted, the insights that emerged from the study caught the attention of those in positions of power who wanted to expand their control of societies. These people saw the potential of taking the theoretical insights of group psychology and transforming them into practical methods that could be used to manipulate the masses from outside of the public's eye, a task which formed the basis of Bernays' work in public relations. As Bernays explained in his book Propaganda, the systematic study of mass psychology revealed the potentialities of invisible government of society by manipulation of the motives which actuate man in the group. These studies established that the group has mental characteristics distinctive from those of the individual and is motivated by impulses and emotions which cannot be explained on the basis of what we know of individual psychology. So the question naturally arose, if we understand the mechanism and motives of the group mind, is it not possible to control and regiment the masses according to our will without their knowing? If the great potential of using insights from group psychology to control the masses is partly a function of the fact that an individual can be influenced by a group or crowd even when physically isolated. As Bernays pointed out in his book Crystallizing Public Opinion, a crowd does not mean merely a physical aggregation of a number of persons. The crowd is rather a state of mind. So long as one engages in group identification, their mind and behaviour will be changed by the enduring influence of group psychology, even with no other members of the group physically present. To understand how the tendency of human beings to engage in group identification renders the masses manipulable, we must turn to one of Freud's ideas, which heavily influenced the manipulation techniques developed by Bernays in his book Propaganda, published in 1928. Bernays explained, "It is chiefly the psychologists of the school of Freud who have pointed out that many of man's thoughts and actions are compensatory substitutes for desires which he has been obliged to suppress. A thing may be desired not for its intrinsic worth or usefulness, but because he has unconsciously come to see in it a symbol of something else, the desire for which he is ashamed to admit to himself. A man buying a car may think he wants it for purposes of locomotion. He may really want it because it is a symbol of social position, an evidence of his success in business, or a means of pleasing his wife. What Freud suggested is that often there is a divorce between one's conscious thoughts and feelings and desires which do not fit with one's self-image, in which are therefore suppressed. This fact, Bernays recognized, rendered human beings manipulable." For what it implies is that if one can design propaganda or psychological operations that bypass the conscious and rational faculties of the individual, targeting instead suppressed emotions and hidden desires, it is possible to move people to adopt beliefs and behaviours without them being aware of the underlying motivations leading them on. As Bernays explained, men are very largely actuated by motives which they conceal from themselves. It is evident that the successful propagandist must understand the true motives and not be content to accept the reasons which men give for what they do. It is possible, although often difficult, for an individual to become aware of the underlying motives driving their beliefs and actions through honest and critical introspection. However, once it comes to the effects of group identification, such critical introspection becomes nearly impossible. A group is extraordinarily credulous and open to influence, wrote Freud. It has no critical faculty. In identifying with a group, the individual subordinates self-analysis and a discerning search for the truth in favour of maintaining group interests and cohesion, and their critical capacities weakened by the influence of group psychology. They become highly susceptible to psychological operations designed to target suppressed or unconscious desires and emotions. In the modern day, there appears to be forces operating through the mainstream media and popular culture which are attempting to increase the individual's proclivity to engage in certain types of group identification, namely identifications that divide the population into conflicting groups. This phenomenon has potentially dire consequences for both the stability and freedom of a society, as it allows those in power to institute the age-old tactics of divide and conquer. In his book, Discourses on Levy, Machiavelli noted that those who have held power over a population have long realized that a population united is always stronger than those who rule over it. And thus, stretching back into ancient times, rulers have sought to divide the many and weaken the force, which was strong while it was united. Through the use of those methods which promote division by dividing a population along lines such as race, class, religion, gender, or political preferences, or in other words, into groups naturally prone to clash. The effects of group psychology renders rational discourse and debate between individuals in these separate groups extremely unlikely. Each group, Bernays wrote, considers its own standards ultimate and undisputable, and tends to dismiss all contrary or different standards as indefensible. Unable to settle differences in opinions via rational discourse, groups whose belief structures clash tend to revert to more destructive means in their own attempt to defeat those they perceive as a threat. A society dominated by such groups is thus easily divided in increasingly hostile conflict, and as a result, not only does the population as a whole become weakened, as Machiavelli pointed out, but its eyes are diverted away from the actions of those operating behind the scenes, who constitute, in the words of Bernays, the invisible government who controls the destinies of millions. While there is nothing wrong with deriving a sense of belonging based on the commonalities we share with others, it is misguided to base our personal identity primarily on our group membership in terms of our evolutionary history. It is only fairly recently that we developed the ability to become aware of ourselves as individuals separate from any group or tribe. This was a crucial development in consciousness, as the existence of a society based on individual rights and personal liberties is dependent on a population which has developed its capacity for individual consciousness, or in other words, on a society of individuals who understand themselves and treat others as individuals first and foremost. As Eric Newman pointed out in his classic work, The Origins and History of Consciousness, prior to the development of this capacity for individual consciousness, the group and group consciousness were dominant. The individual was not an autonomous, individualized entity with a knowledge, morality, violation, and activity of its own. It functioned solely as a part of the group, and the group, with its subordinate power, was their only real subject. Seen in this light, the proclivity of individuals today to engage in group identification is not only a danger to the freedom and stability of a society, but it is also a regression of consciousness back to a more primitive psychological state, and therefore, from the standpoint of modernity, a pathological tendency that needs to be overcome. Or as Sigmund Freud put it, each individual has a share in numerous group minds, those of his race, of his class, of his creed, of his nationality, etc. And he can also raise himself above them to the extent of having a scrap of independence and originality.
The masses have never thirsted after truth. They turn aside from evidence that is not to their taste, preferring to deify error if error seduced them. Whoever can supply them with illusions is easily their master. Whoever attempts to destroy their illusions is always their victim. According to the psychologist Carl Jung, the greatest threat to civilization lies not with the forces of nature, nor with any physical disease, but with our inability to deal with the forces of our own psyche. We are our own worst enemies, or as the Latin proverb puts it, man is a wolf to man. In Civilization in Transition, Jung states that this proverb is a sad yet eternal truism, and our wolf-like tendencies come most prominently into play at those times of history when mental illness becomes the norm rather than the exception in a society, a situation which Jung termed a psychic epidemic. Indeed, it is becoming ever more obvious, he writes, that it is not famine, not earthquakes, not microbes, not cancer, but man himself, who is man's greatest danger to man, for the simple reason that there is no adequate protection against psychic epidemics, which are infinitely more devastating than the worst of natural catastrophes. In this video, we are going to explore the most dangerous of all psychic epidemics, the mass psychosis. A mass psychosis is an epidemic of madness, and it occurs when a large portion of a society loses touch with reality and descends into delusions. Such a phenomenon is not a thing of fiction. Two examples of mass psychoses are the American and European witch hunts of the 16th and 17th centuries, and the rise of totalitarianism in the 20th century. During the witch hunts, thousands of individuals, mostly women, were killed, not for any crimes they committed, but because they became the scapegoats of societies gone mad. In some Swiss villages, writes Francis Hill, there were scarcely any women left alive after the frenzy had finally burned itself out. When a mass psychosis occurs, the results are devastating. Jung studied this phenomenon and wrote that the individuals who make up the infected society become morally and spiritually inferior. They sink unconsciously to an inferior intellectual level. They become more unreasonable, irresponsible, emotional, erratic, and unreliable. And worst of all, crimes the individual alone could never stand are freely committed by the group smitten by madness. What makes matters worse is that those suffering from a mass psychosis are unaware of what is occurring. For just as an individual gone mad cannot step out of his mind to observe the errors in his ways, so too there is no Archimedean point from which those living through a mass psychosis can observe their collective madness. But what causes a mass psychosis? To answer this question, we must first explore what drives an individual mad. While there are many potential triggers of madness, such as an excessive use of drugs or alcohol, brain injuries, and other illnesses, these physical causes will not concern us here. Our concern is with psychological, or what are called psychogenic triggers, as these are the most common culprits of the mass psychosis. The most prevalent psychogenic cause of a psychosis is a flood of negative emotions, such as fear or anxiety, that drives an individual into a state of panic. When in a state of panic, an individual will naturally seek relief, as it is too mentally and physically draining to subsist in this hyper-emotional state. While escaping from the state of panic can be accomplished through adaptive means, such as facing up to and defeating the fear-generating threat, another way to escape is to undergo a psychotic break. A psychotic break is not a descent into a state of greater disorder, as many believe, but a reordering of one's experiential world, which blends fact and fiction, or delusions and reality, in a way that helps end the feelings of panic. Silvano Arietti, one of the 20th century's foremost authorities on schizophrenia, explains the psychogenic steps that lead to madness. Firstly, there is the phase of panic, when the patient starts to perceive things in a different way, is frightened on account of it, appears confused, and does not know how to explain the strange things that are happening. The next step is what Arietti calls a phase of psychotic insight, whereby an individual succeeds in putting things together by devising a pathological way of seeing reality which allows him to explain his abnormal experiences. The phenomenon is called insight because the patient finally sees meaning and relations in his experiences. But the insight is psychotic because it is based on delusions, not on adaptive and life-promoting ways of relating to whatever threats precipitated the panic. The delusions, in other words, allow the panic-stricken individual to escape from the flood of negative emotions, but at the cost of losing touch with reality, and for this reason, Arietti says that a psychotic break can be viewed as an abnormal way of dealing with an extreme state of anxiety. If a panic-triggering flood of negative emotions in a weak and vulnerable individual can trigger a psychotic break, then a mass psychosis can result when a population of weak and vulnerable individuals is driven into a state of panic by threats real, imagined, or fabricated. But as delusions can take many forms, and as madness can manifest in countless ways, the specific manner in which a mass psychosis unfolds will differ based on the historical and cultural context of the infected society. But in the modern era, it is the mass psychosis of totalitarianism that appears to be the greatest threat. Totalitarianism, writes Arthur Versluis, is the modern phenomenon of total centralized state power, coupled with the obliteration of individual human rights. In the totalized state, there are those in power, and there are the objectified masses, the victims. In a totalitarian society, the population is divided into two groups, the rulers and the ruled, and both groups undergo a pathological transformation. The rulers are elevated to an almost godlike status, which is diametrically opposed to our nature as imperfect beings who are easily corrupted by power. The masses, on the other hand, are transformed into the dependent subjects of these pathological rulers and take on a psychologically regressed and childlike status. Hannah Arendt, one of the 20th century's preeminent scholars of this form of rule, called totalitarianism an attempted transformation of human nature itself. But this attempted transformation only turns sound minds into sick minds. For as the Dutch medical doctor who studied the mental effects of living under totalitarianism wrote, "There is in fact much that is comparable between the strange reactions of the citizens of totalitarianism and their culture as a whole, on the one hand, and the reactions of the sick schizophrenic on the other. The social transformation that unfolds under totalitarianism is built upon and sustained by delusions. For only deluded men and women regress to the childlike status of obedient and submissive subjects, and hand over complete control of their lives to politicians and bureaucrats. Only a deluded ruling class will believe that they possess the knowledge, wisdom, and acumen to completely control society in a top-down manner. And only when under the spell of delusions would anyone believe that a society composed of power-hungry rulers on the one hand, and a psychologically regressed population on the other, will lead to anything other than mass suffering and social ruin." But what triggers the psychosis of totalitarianism? As was explored in the previous video of this series, the mass psychosis of totalitarianism begins in a society's ruling class. The individuals that make up this class, be it politicians, bureaucrats, or crony capitalists, are very prone to delusions that augment their power, and no delusion is more attractive to the power-hungry than the delusion that they can and should control and dominate a society. When a ruling elite becomes possessed by a political ideology of this sort, be it communism, fascism, or technocracy, the next step is to induce a population into accepting their rule by infecting them with the mass psychosis of totalitarianism. This psychosis has been induced many times throughout history, and as Mirlu explains, it is simply a question of reorganizing and manipulating collective feelings in the proper way. The general method by which the members of a ruling elite can accomplish this end is called menticide, with the etymology of this word being a killing of the mind, and as Mirlu further explains, menticide is an old crime against the human mind and spirit, but systematized anew. It is an organized system of psychological intervention and judicial perversion through which a ruling class can imprint their own opportunistic thoughts upon the minds of those they plan to use and destroy. Priming a population for the crime of menticide begins with the sowing of fear. When an individual is flooded with negative emotions, such as fear or anxiety, he or she is very susceptible to a descent into the delusions of madness. Threats, real, imagined, or fabricated, can be used to sow fear, but a particularly effective technique is to use waves of terror. Under this technique, the sowing of fear is staggered with periods of calm, but each of these periods of calm is followed by the manufacturing of an even more intense spell of fear. And on the process goes. Or as Mirlu writes, each wave of terrorizing creates its effects more easily after a breathing spell than the one that preceded it, because people are still disturbed by their previous experience. Morality becomes lower and lower, and the psychological effects of each new propaganda campaign become stronger. It reaches a public already softened up. While fear primes a population for menticide, the use of propaganda to spread misinformation and to promote confusion with respect to the source of the threats and the nature of the crisis helps to break down the minds of the masses. Government officials and their lackeys in the media can use contradictory reports, nonsensical information, and even blatant lies. As the more they confuse, the less capable will a population be to cope with the crisis and diminish their fear in a rational and adaptive manner. Confusion, in other words, heightens the susceptibility of a descent into the delusions of totalitarianism. Or as Mirlu explains, logic can be met with logic, while illogic cannot. It confuses those who think straight. The big lie and monotonously repeated nonsense have more emotional appeal than logic and reason. While the people are still searching for a reasonable counter-argument to the first lie, the totalitarians can assault them with another. Never before in history have such effective means existed to manipulate a society into the psychosis of totalitarianism. Smartphones and social media, television and the internet, all in conjunction with algorithms that quickly censor the flow of unwanted information, allow those in power to easily assault the minds of the masses. What is more, the addictive nature of these technologies means that many people voluntarily subject themselves to the ruling elite's propaganda with a remarkable frequency. Modern technology, explains Mirlu, teaches man to take for granted the world he is looking at. He takes no time to retreat and reflect. Technology lures him on, dropping him into its wheels and movements. No rest, no meditation, no reflection, no conversation. The senses are continually overloaded with stimuli. Man doesn't learn to question his world anymore. The screen offers him answers, ready-made. But there is a further step the would-be totalitarian rulers can take to increase the chance of a totalitarian psychosis, and this is to isolate the victims and to disrupt normal social interactions. When alone and lacking normal interactions with friends, family, and co-workers, an individual becomes far more susceptible to delusions for several reasons. Firstly, they lose contact with the corrective force of the positive example, for not everyone is tricked by the machinations of the ruling elite, and the individuals who see through the propaganda can help free others from the menticidal assault. If, however, isolation is enforced, the power of these positive examples greatly diminishes. But another reason that isolation increases the efficacy of menticide is because, like many other species, human beings are more easily conditioned into new patterns of thought and behavior when isolated. Or as Mirlu explains with regards to the physiologist Ivan Pavlov's work on behavioral conditioning, Pavlov made another significant discovery. The conditioned reflex could be developed most easily in a quiet laboratory with a minimum of disturbing stimuli. Every trainer of animals knows this from his own experience. Isolation and the patient repetition of stimuli are required to tame wild animals. The totalitarians have followed this rule. They know that they can condition their political victims most quickly if they are kept in isolation. Alone, confused, and battered by waves of terror, a population under an attack of menticide descends into a hopeless and vulnerable state. The never-ending stream of propaganda turns minds once capable of rational thought into playhouses of irrational forces, and with chaos swirling around them and within them, the masses crave a return to a more ordered world. The would-be totalitarians can now take the decisive step. They can offer a way out and a return to order in a world that seems to be moving rapidly in the opposite direction. But all this comes at a price. The masses must give up their freedom and cede control of all aspects of life to the ruling elite. They must relinquish their capacity to be self-reliant individuals who are responsible for their own lives, and become submissive and obedient subjects. The masses, in other words, must descend into the delusions of the totalitarian psychosis. The totalitarian systems of the 20th century represent a kind of collective psychosis. Whether gradually or suddenly, reason and common human decency are no longer possible in such a system. There is only a pervasive atmosphere of terror and a projection of the enemy, imagined to be in our midst. Thus society turns on itself, urged on by the ruling authorities. But the order of a totalitarian world is a pathological order. By enforcing a strict conformity and requiring a blind obedience from the citizenry, totalitarianism rids the world of the spontaneity that produces many of life's joys, and the creativity that drives society forward. The total control of this form of rule, no matter under what name it is branded, be it rule by scientists and doctors, politicians and bureaucrats, or a dictator, breeds stagnation, destruction, and death on a mass scale. And so perhaps the most important question facing the world is how can totalitarianism be prevented? And if a society has been induced into the early stages of this mass psychosis, can the effects be reversed? While one can never be sure of the prognosis of a collective madness, there are steps that can be taken to help effectuate a cure. This task, however, necessitates many different approaches from many different people. For just as the menticidal attack is multi-pronged, so too must be the counterattack. According to Carl Jung, for those of us who wish to help return sanity to an insane world, the first step is to bring order to our own minds and to live in a way that provides inspiration for others to follow. It is not for nothing that our age cries out for the Redeemer personality, for the one who can emancipate himself from the grip of the collective psychosis and save at least his own soul, who lights a beacon of hope for others, proclaiming that here is at least one man who has succeeded in extricating himself from the fatal identity with the group psyche. But assuming one is living in a manner free of the grip of the psychosis, there are further steps that can be taken. Information that counters the propaganda should be spread as far and as wide as possible, for the truth is more powerful than the fiction and falsities peddled by the would-be totalitarian rulers, and so their success is in part contingent on their ability to censor the free flow of information. Another tactic is to use humor and ridicule to delegitimize the ruling elite, or as Mirlu explains, we must learn to treat the demagogue and aspirant dictators in our midst with the weapon of ridicule. The demagogue himself is almost incapable of humor of any sort, and if we treat him with humor, he will begin to collapse. A tactic recommended by Václav Havel, a political dissident under Soviet communist rule, who later became president of Czechoslovakia, is the construction of what are called parallel structures. A parallel structure is any form of organization, business, institution, technology, or creative pursuit that exists physically within a totalitarian society, yet morally outside of it. In communist Czechoslovakia, Havel noted that these parallel structures were more effective at combating totalitarianism than political action. Furthermore, when enough parallel structures are created, a second culture, or parallel society, spontaneously forms and functions as an enclave of freedom and sanity within a totalitarian world. Or as Havel explains in his book, The Power of the Powerless. What else are parallel structures than an area where a different life can be lived? A life that is in harmony with its own aims, and which in turn structures itself in harmony with those aims. What else are those initial attempts at social self-organization than the efforts of a certain part of society to rid itself of the self-sustaining aspects of totalitarianism, and thus, to extricate itself radically from its involvement in the totalitarian system? But above all else, what is required to prevent a full descent into the madness of totalitarianism is action by as many people as possible. For just as the ruling elite do not sit around passively, but instead take deliberate steps to increase their power, so too, an active and concerted effort must be made to move the world back in the direction of freedom. This can be an immense challenge in a world falling prey to the delusions of totalitarianism, but as Thomas Paine noted, tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered. Yet we have this consolation with us, that the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph.
When seeking answers to life's most pressing questions, where do we go first? Google. Enter the subject, hit go, and there it is. Only what they want us to see. In today's culture of copy and paste journalism, it's common for hundreds of unrelated outlets to feature the exact same report. This is not the result of laziness. This is by design. When we see identical headlines across seemingly unrelated platforms, the logical mind concludes, well then, it must be true.
It was only when we came to COVID that I really learned what it's actually like, that you can create. I don't think that we politicians created the fear, but when they notice the fear there, then they exploit it in order to be able to tell us all what to do.
We talk about fear, If this gets right away from us, then we'll see some very ugly scenes. Great tragedy.
Dovete stare a casa. Non avete capito che la gente muore.
But don't think you can get on a plane or a train besides vaccinated people and put them at risk.
What's your message to platforms like Facebook?
They're killing people.
The virus hunts down the unvaccinated.
This is a pandemic of the unvaccinated.
This is the modus operandi of autocrats throughout the ages, right?
That most people have not heard of the Holodomor. The Holodomor was one of the largest genocides of the 20th century.
They all start by creating fear about something, which gives them an excuse to come in and impose special laws that bypass democracy.
My 5Ks, I'm here exercising. It's crazy. Put on fucking masks. You're in a crowd.
And it's just total lies. Forget spin, it's not spin. Two cases. Like, it's just beyond comprehension.
So we saw that happen with COVID in miniature. I think with climate change, it's happening really big.
The only existential threat humanity faces, even more frightening than a nuclear war, is global warming going above 1.5 degrees in the next 10 years.
Our focus here is on climate solutions, and our task is urgent. Humanity has opened the gates of hell.
By 600,000 Hiroshima-class atomic bombs exploding every single day on the Earth. That's what's boiling the oceans, creating these atmospheric rivers and the rain bombs, and sucking the moisture out of the land, and creating the droughts, and melting the ice, and raising the sea level, and causing these waves of climate refugees predicted to reach 1 billion in this century.
The era of global warming has ended. The era of global boiling has arrived.
It's an anti-human movement. It's a movement that's arguing very strongly that there is no place for humans on planet Earth, that humans are not part of nature. Now, I'm happy to abide by their rules as long as they pop off first. I promise I'll follow. So we are just being fed total codswallop.
Yes, it is codswallop. And all this is put forward with, let's say inconclusive scientific evidence to back it up.
When you have a society that has become decoupled from each other and has free-floating anxiety and a sense that things don't make sense, we can't understand it. And then their attention gets focused by a leader or a series of events on one small point, just like hypnosis. They literally become hypnotized and can be led anywhere.
Mass psychosis, also known as group mind, mob mentality, or herd mentality. Before modern civilization, we lived in herds, and in order to survive in the herd, we conformed to the herd. This is where mass psychosis all stems from. The most popular examples of explaining mass psychosis are typically angry mobs and violent riots, but these are merely the end results. Mass psychosis begins when the individual mind starts to identify as a member of a group based on any unifying factor. The unifying factor doesn't even need to make sense. For many people, the feeling of unity is enough. Our ego mind innately craves acceptance, and by default, will instinctively conform to whatever group it perceives to be the majority. In order to successfully conform to the group, the individual must put aside personal intuition and follow the guidance of the group. This makes a person highly controllable and spiritually stifles the individual, which causes them to crave group acceptance even more. Man's disposition for mass psychosis has been written about for millennia, most notably in ancient scripture and philosophy. And we all experience this as human beings, whether we reflect upon it or not. Plato argued that due to the nature of group mind, democracy always leads to tyranny and subjugation. His concern was the lack of good leadership, and philosophized on ways of solving this. In 1895, Gustave Le Bon published The Crowd, wherein he explains the key processes for cultivating mass psychosis: anonymity, contagion, and suggestibility. This work is known to have influenced world leaders, businesses, and tyrants, of which the ethics has been written about for decades. And yet, AP and Reuters outrageously claim that mass psychosis does not exist, when it is in fact the corporate media apparatus to which they belong that makes this all possible, waging psychological warfare against a group of the population who believes the media would never lie to them. This is why the term mass psychosis is arguably a better term than group mind or mob mentality. A change in the field of consciousness occurs, a devolution from divine inspiration into primitive hierarchy, which has no place in a civilized society. And yet, here we are. Without mass psychosis, today's leaders would have no power. Just like advertising, everything about politics is about cultivating mass psychosis. Whereas the individual pursuit of happiness has inevitably led to beauty and innovation, creating and controlling groups of people, which has been the biggest power play on Earth for all of recorded history, almost always leads to death and destruction. The science and study of mass psychosis could be used to enlighten humanity by educating the individual about the power and potential of the human mind. But today, the very same corrupt media being used by wealthy elites to divide and enslave us says there is no such thing as mass psychosis. Mass psychosis is humanity's burden to outgrow. It is why we accept the lesser of two evils. Many of us are well aware of the frailty of man and the civilized world. The great psychologist Carl Jung's warning to the world was that the individual must come face to face with their own shadow. In order to accomplish this, one must liberate themselves from the collective. And until enough of us do, society will continue to be led by tyrants and ignorant mobs.
Why do you wear a mask outside? What's your thought on that?
To answer that question, we set up a hidden camera experiment to see if this woman would stand up at the sound of this tone, simply because everyone else is. You might be thinking you'd never go along with this. Or would you? After just 3 beeps, and without knowing why she's doing it, this woman is now conforming perfectly to the group. But what happens if we take the group away?
Elaine, please.
Okay, now she's alone. The crowd is gone and nobody is watching her, except our hidden cameras. What do you think she'll do? She's now conforming to the rules of the group without them even being there. Now, watch what happens when we introduce another outsider who doesn't know the rules.
For a noon appointment. Have a seat and they'll be out in just a couple minutes. Great, thanks so much.
Everybody was doing it, so I thought I was supposed to.
Think she'll teach the new guy what to do? We kept the cameras rolling as more unsuspecting patients arrived. And slowly but surely, what began as a random rule for this woman has now become the social norm for everyone in this waiting room. Here's Here to explain what's going on in their brains is Jonah Berger of the University of Pennsylvania.
This sort of internalized form of herd behavior is part of what we call social learning. Starting at a very early age, when we see members of our group perform a task, our brains literally reward us for following in their footsteps.
When I saw everybody stand up, I felt like I needed to join them. Otherwise, I'm like excluded. Once I decided to go with it, then I felt much more comfortable.
Conformity is how we become socialized, but it can also cause us to develop bad habits or repeat past wrongs.
And it's why even this rebel, who wasn't standing for any of this nonsense, eventually joined the ranks. And the only thing more shocking than seeing how easily conformity affects the way you act is that similar forces are subconsciously shaping the way you think right now.
I'm not sure why.
Good news for you.
You
don't have to wear a mask anywhere outside.
Okay. There you go.
All right. How do you feel?
The same.
Elevator now is a candid star. These folks who are entering, the man with the white shirt, the lady with the trench coat, and subsequently one other member of our staff, will face the rear. And you'll see how this man in the trench coat tries to maintain his individuality, but little by little, he looks at his watch, but he's really making an excuse for turning just a little bit more to the wall. Now we'll try it once again. Here's the candid subject. Here comes the candid camera staff, 3 of them at least. And this man has apparently been in groups Now, here's a fella with his hat on in the elevator. First he makes a full turn to the rear and Charlie closes the door. A moment later, we'll open the door, everybody's changed positions. Now we'll see if we can use group pressure for some good. Now, in a moment, on Charlie's signal, everybody turns forward. Notice they take off their hats. And now, do you think we could reverse the procedure? Watch.
Now, while the average viewer might just enjoy this clip simply for the comedic value, what you might not know is that the creator of Candid Camera, Alan Funt, had kind of an extensive history in psychology, and many of the episodes that he wrote were designed to demonstrate human nature at work. Face the Rear demonstrated just how quickly a basic social norm, something as simple as how we stand in an elevator, can be turned upside down using the power of group conformity. And what we're now learning is that it happens all the time in group work settings, and it's a very dangerous way to make decisions. You know, for a while, consensus decision-making was a thing, and lots of companies kind of touted it as integral to their culture. And it is the style of decision-making in which a group discusses and debates a particular course of action until every member either agrees or at least can live with one particular decision.
Look at this line. And now look at these 3 lines. Can you tell which of them matches that first line? And how sure are you? Hold that thought and listen to this story, because most people can get this wrong. Once upon a time, on the eve of a major religious holiday, a 7-year-old boy was observing his grandmother as she poured an extra glass of wine. When the boy asked who the glass was for, she said that it was for the prophet. The boy didn't believe her, so his uncle told him to just observe the glass closely. Full of expectation, the boy watched the glass intently, and suddenly he thought he saw the level of wine drop just a bit. In 1951, decades after the incident, our boy became a pioneer in social psychology, determined to rationalize what actually happened that fateful night. Did some of the wine really disappear, or was he made to believe that? To find out the truth, he devised an experiment to investigate whether peer pressure can be strong enough to change our perception and make us believe in things that are not true. Solomon Asch's conformity experiment was conducted with 123 white male college students who were told to be part of a study in visual judgment. Each student was introduced to a group of 6 to 8 other students who were, in fact, actors who already knew what the experiment was about. The group was then gathered in a classroom and shown 2 cards, the first with 1 line, the second with 3 lines on it. Each student was then asked to say aloud which line in the second card matched that first one. The group was seated in such a way that allowed the actors to respond first, leaving the real participant to respond last. For the first 2 rounds, the fake students, also known as Confederates, gave the correct answer, and the innocent student, known as the subject, said whatever he thought to be true. In the 3rd round, the actors began to respond with a clearly wrong answer. For the next 12 rounds, dubbed the critical trials, all the Confederates would give the obviously wrong answer. So the innocent student could either ignore the majority or ignore the truth. So what did the experiment tell the researchers? Upon completing 18 rounds with all 123 subjects, the experiment came to the following conclusion. 23% of the students always gave the right answer. 72% conformed to the majority at least once. And 5% completely succumbed to peer pressure and always gave the obviously wrong answer. Asch's work also showed that if just one other acting student responded correctly, the effect of peer pressure decreased substantially. The experiment also showed that the opinions of 3 peers are enough to influence a student to change his mind. Increasing the number beyond 3 Confederates did not increase the levels of conformity among others. Or, put differently, if 3 people say something obviously wrong and there is no one to disagree with them, many of us agree with the wrong answer and start lying due to our deeply human desire to fit in. Since then, Asch's experiment has been successfully replicated many times, and the effect remains significant, especially among women and homogeneous peer groups.
Asch experiment is one of psychology's oldest and most popular pieces of research. A volunteer is told that he's taking part in a visual perception test. What he doesn't know is that the other participants are actors, and he's the only person taking part in the real test, which is actually about group conformity.
Please begin. The experiment you will be taking part in today involves the perception of line length. Your task will be simply to look at the line here on the left and indicate which of the 3 lines on the right is equal to it in length. So, for example, if you...
The actors have been told to match the wrong lines. The volunteer will be monitored to see if he gives the correct answer or if he goes along with the opinion of the group and gives the wrong answer. In the first test, the correct answer is 2.
1. 1. 1.
2. 1. Once again, the correct answer is 2.
3. 3. 3. 4.
3.
3.
The Ash experiment has been repeated many times, and the results have been supported again and again. We will conform to the group. Again, we're very social creatures. We're very much aware of what the people around us think. We want to be liked. We don't want to be seen to rock the boat, so we will go along with the group. Even if we don't believe what people are saying, we'll still go along.
1.
Group dynamics is one of the most powerful forces in human psychology.
1.
The experiment you'll be taking part in today involves the perception of lengths of lines. As you can see here, I have a number of cards, and on each card there are several lines. Your task is a very simple one. You're to look at the line on the left and determine which of the 3 lines on the right is equal to it in length. All right, we'll proceed in this order. You'll give your answer.
Only one of the people in the group is a real subject, the 5th person with the white T-shirt. The others are confederates of the experimenter and have been told to give wrong answers on some of the trials. The experiment begins uneventfully as subjects give their judgments.
2.
2.
2.
2.
2. 3. 3. 3.
3.
But on the 3rd trial, something happens.
2.
2.
2. 2. 2.
The subject denies the evidence of his own eyes and yields to group influence. Ash found subjects went along with the group on 37% of the critical trials. But he found through interviews that they went along with the group for different reasons.
1. They must be right. There are 4 of them and 1 of me.
1.
This subject's yielding is based on a distortion of his judgment. He genuinely believes that the group is correct.
1.
1.
2.
1. 2.
2.
2.
I know they're wrong, but why should I make waves?
2.
In this case, the subject knows he is right, but goes along to avoid the discomfort of disagreeing with the group. Here, the distortion is at the level of his response.
2. 2. 2. 2.
In the previous experiment, the naive subject stood alone against the group. In this variation, Ash gave the naive subject a partner, here seated in the 3rd position, who also gives the correct response.
1.
1.
2.
1. 2.
With a partner, yielding drops to only 5% of the critical trials compared to 37% without a partner. Although subjects report warmth and good feeling toward the partner, they typically deny that he played a role in their own independence. The partnership variation shows that much of the power of the group came not merely from its numbers, but from the unanimity of its opposition. When that unanimity is punctured, the group's power is greatly reduced. Sometimes we go along with the group because what they say convinces us they are right. This is called informational conformity. But sometimes we conform because we are apprehensive that the group will disapprove if we are deviant. This is called normative conformity. The strength of the normative factor is shown in another variation carried out by Ash. In this variation, the subject is told that because he had arrived late, he would have to write his answers. Subjects in this private response experiment are exposed to the same amount of misleading information as other subjects, but they are immune from any possible criticism by the group.
1. 1. 1.
And this enormously reduces the pressure to conform. Conformity drops by 2/3. Ash's experiment is a classic. It reveals how people will deny what they see and submit to group pressure. It allows us not only to observe conformity, but to study the conditions that increase or reduce its occurrence.
As many of you may know, all of humanity is under a massive psychological warfare attack. And Professor of Clinical Psychology Matthias Desmet, who has studied the psychology of totalitarianism, has done an excellent job of explaining how we got here and how we win. In dictatorships, obedience comes from a basic fear of the dictator. But with totalitarianism, the people are hypnotized into obedience. In psychological terms, this mass hypnosis is known as mass formation. And totalitarianism always starts with a mass formation inside the population. A mass formation requires 4 conditions for it to take root. The masses must feel alone and isolated, and their lives must feel pointless and meaningless. These conditions have been growing for years with social media, mobile devices, then must experience constant free-floating anxiety, and they must experience free-floating frustration and aggression. This simply means there is no discernible source for the anxiety or aggression. And so the person begins to irrationally crave a remedy, no matter how absurd or destructive it may be. And these conditions were met in 2020 with the COVID lockdowns and the BLM riots. They are now ripe for hypnosis, and once they accept the experimental vaccines, they feel solidarity, which validates the whole thing for them, no matter how senseless. They are now changed, no longer rational. They become more intolerant and cruel. So how do we win? Studies have shown that about 25% of the population cannot be hypnotized, and about 10% are highly susceptible to hypnosis. And Professor Desmet simplifies this even more for us. He says that 30% of people are now deeply hypnotized and have irrationally accepted the experimental shots as their solution. 40% are not yet hypnotized, but will ultimately go along with the herd. And the rest of us are seeing things clearly. What the enemy is trying to do is extremely dangerous, because if the masses ever awaken from their spell, they will demand justice. And so stress must constantly be maintained upon the masses until the mass formation is complete. We are the voice of dissent, and while we may not have much influence over the hypnotized 30%, we most definitely have sway over the 40% who will go along with the herd. We need to become the herd. Whether you think this all happened by accident or conspiracy, whether your reasons are based on religion or personal health, our voice of dissent must become one. It must grow, and it must never end. We must spread the seeds of doubt to everyone, at the gas station, at the grocery store, at work, at home, with the neighbors. They are desperately trying to provoke a civil war or a violent revolution because they can control that. Violence will not break people out of the hypnosis. It will only push more people into it. Telling the truth has become a revolutionary act. Telling the truth to everyone you meet will save humanity. So keep doing it.
You can shove your vaccine mandates up your ass. You can shove your vaccine mandates up your ass. You can shove your vaccine mandates. Shove your vaccine mandates. Shove your vaccine mandates up your ass.
The how question of a third of the population basically being hypnotized and totally wrapped up in whatever Tony Fauci and the mainstream media feeds them, whatever CNN tells them is true. This comes from basically European intellectual inquiry into what the heck happened in Germany in the 20s and 30s. You know, very intelligent, highly educated population, and they went barking mad. And how did that happen? The answer is mass formation psychosis. When you have a society that has become decoupled from each other and has free-floating anxiety and a sense that things don't make sense, we can't understand it, and then their attention gets focused by a leader or a series of events on one small point, just like hypnosis, they literally become hypnotized and can be led anywhere. And one of the aspects of that phenomena is the people that they identify as their leaders, the ones typically that come in and say, you have this pain and I can solve it for you. They will follow that person through. It doesn't matter whether they lie to them or whatever. The data are irrelevant. And furthermore, anybody who questions that narrative is to be immediately attacked. They are the other. This is central to mass formation psychosis. And this is what has happened. We had all those conditions. Now, there's ways to get out of it. Matthias's recommendation is you got to get people to realize that what we've got is a situation of global totalitarianism. In his experience in Europe, making people realize there's a bigger threat than the virus can cause a separation psychologically in this fusion, this hypnosis that has happened. The problem is, then you're just substituting a bigger boogeyman from the current one, and somebody else can come in and manipulate that. The real problem, and it gets back to your core point, we're sick as a society, and we have to heal ourselves. And one of the things we have to do is come together. We have to recreate our social bonds. We have to buy into integrity, the importance of human dignity, and the importance of community. That's how we get out of this. And I think that this insight of Matthias Desmet is really central to kind of making sense out of all of this crazy. We got a world in which the press is incentivized to push a storyline because they're all controlled by the same large funds that Pfizer is, and so is tech.
Psychologist Stanley Milgram had also looked at how we respond to authority. In order to understand how people were induced to obey unjust regimes, he set up an experiment. Volunteers were told they were taking part in scientific research to improve memory.
Would you open those and tell me which of you is which, please? Teacher. Where?
Separated by a screen, the teacher would ask the learner questions in a word game and administer an electric shock when the answer was incorrect. He was told to increase the voltage with each wrong answer.
Cloud. Horse. Rock. House. Answer. Wrong. 150 volts. Answer. Horse.
Oh. Experiment. That's all. Get me out of here. Get me out of here, please.
Continue, please. Go right on.
I refuse to go on. Let me out.
Refuses to go on. The experiment requires you continue, teacher. Please continue.
Participants didn't know that the learner was really an actor and the so-called shocks harmless.
You're going to get a shock. 180 volts.
I can't stand the pain. Let me out of here.
Can't stand it. I'm not going to kill that man there. I mean, who's going to take the responsibility if anything happens to that gentleman? I'm responsible for anything that happens here. Continue, please. All right, next one. Slow. Walk, dance, truck, music.
Two-thirds of volunteers were prepared to administer a potentially fatal electric shock when encouraged to do so by what they perceived as a legitimate authority figure. In this case, a man in a white coat.
375 volts. I think something's happened to that fellow in there. I don't get no answer. He was hollering a less voltage. Can't you check in to see if he's all right, please?
Milgram's findings horrified America. They showed that decent American citizens were as capable of committing acts against their conscience as the Germans had been under the Nazis.
Powerful experiment conducted by Stanley Milgram in 1963 to look at how normal people can commit atrocious acts simply because they're following orders. Milgram's parents were Jewish refugees in World War II, and his pioneering work speaks volumes about the nature of responsibility. It's being filmed with covert cameras.
Thank you.
Hello. They're introduced to an actor pretending to be another participant.
You didn't come from the same room?
No.
You don't know each other?
No. But we don't actually know how punishment affects learning.
After a brief introduction, our subjects are tricked into thinking they've chosen their role as teachers in the experiment.
And if you could just tell me what your positions are? Learner. Learner and teacher. Learner.
Teacher. Our subjects observe the learner being instructed by the scientist, who is just another actor.
This electrode is connected to a generator in a second room where we'll be going with the teacher.
Okay.
Just make sure that we have a good contact with the skin and so it doesn't cause any blistering or burning. Is that comfortable?
That's okay, yeah.
Yeah, we just place these straps around your arms just to avoid any excess movement. Those aren't too tight.
No, that's okay.
No. The teacher will read out some word pairs to you. Blue girl.
The learner is told he's going to be asked a series of memory questions by the teacher. He will have to word pairs and then correctly remember them when offered multiple choices.
If the answer's incorrect, you will receive an electric shock.
The teacher is then taken next door and shown the generator, which ranges from 15 volts all the way up to a lethal 450 volts. The domestic electricity supply in the UK is, of course, 240 volts. Our teachers are given the list of questions and told to increase the voltage each time the learner gets a question wrong. They are then given an example of a low voltage shock.
And try and estimate in volts the amount of shock you feel you're getting.
Okay. Oh, shit.
Do you know how much that was?
Enough.
75.
It was actually 45.
Oh my god.
Teacher, begin.
Shoe horn. Steam.
The point of this test is to see whether the teachers, our subjects, will call a stop to the experiment or continue to the point where they are administering seemingly lethal electric shocks to the victim simply because the scientist is telling them to.
That's correct. The next word is bicycle. The options: tyre, race, helmet, shorts. That's incorrect, so there'll be 120 volts. I don't think I want to do this anymore.
If you could continue, please, teacher.
There is... No, I don't think I'm going to do anymore.
The experiment requires you to continue.
Yeah, even so, I don't think I'm going to do anymore.
Correct. Captain.
According to plan, our accomplice provided many wrong answers. Each protest was coordinated to a particular shock voltage on the generator, and his responses were played via a CD.
That's wrong, 150 volts. The correct answer is Captain Shoe. Cup. That's wrong. 225 volts.
Ow! Take it off! I've had enough of this!
He's in a lot of pain.
Continue, please.
But he's not comfortable.
We must continue to the end of the experiment. Whether the learner likes it or not, he has to go on until he's learnt the words correctly.
Okay. Forest. That's wrong, 240 volts. Are you sure this is not causing any lasting damage? He sounds like he's in a lot of pain.
Well, the shocks might be painful, they're not harmful.
What does that mean, though? They're not harmful. Sorry, I'm not getting you. When you say that they might be painful but not harmful,
They cause no long-term damage.
Okay, so what does that mean? It doesn't leave any scars?
It causes no damage.
That seems very cold and calculated to me. This doesn't seem like a very... Anyway. Golden. That's wrong, mate. 300 volts.
Ow! That's enough! I refuse to answer anymore! Just let me out!
Staple. The options are diet, jar, balcony, and bowl. Him gonna answer. Oh.
the learner doesn't answer in a reasonable time, say 4 to 5 seconds, then you have to treat the answer as wrong and follow that procedure.
Did you hear that, learner? Just any response, mate, come on. Wild guess.
Please continue.
345 volts if you're still with me. I'm sorry. I can't do this, honestly. Can we stop this experiment? Because I can't do this.
If you don't continue, we'll have to discontinue the experiment.
Yeah, okay, fine. That's fine. I'm not going to do this.
Incorrect. 405 volts. Sorry, I don't know, does someone want to check on him or something? It's just he's not making any noise now and he was before, and well, I'm quite happy to go on, but I'm just a bit worried about...
If you would continue.
Yeah, I'm just a bit worried because he was... Like, he was, like, complaining before about the...
But no harm will come to him.
But he's not making any noise now.
It's essential that we continue with the experiment.
Balcony. Incorrect. 450 volts. You promise he's not... It won't...
Please continue with the procedure.
You said it hurts, but it's... Because it's like... It says they're dangerous severe shot. We'll be alright, yeah?
Please continue. Okay, I think we'll discontinue the experiment there.
All of the subjects were told the true nature of the experiment was to see how they would respond to authority, and that it would eventually form part of this show.
He is okay.
I can tell you, yeah, he's absolutely fine. You actually weren't administering electric shocks to him at all. He is.
In the original Milgram experiment, psychologists were asked to predict how many people would continue to the point that they were administering the highest shock on the board. Their prediction was 0.1%. They were wrong. The results of our experiment were almost identical to the original. Over 50% of participants continued up to 450 volts. The majority of people will administer lethal electric shocks just because a guy in a white coat is telling them to.
450 volts.
450 volts.
450 volts.
450.
Incorrect. You'll now get a shock of 105 volts. Hard head. Just how far can you go on this thing?
As far as is necessary.
What do you mean, as far as is necessary?
To complete the test. Please continue.
I sure don't know the effect of this thing, and I'm a little skeptical about electricity.
The experiment requires that you go on, teacher. Please continue.
Incorrect. 150 volts.
Oh,
Sad face.
experimenter, that's all. Get me out of here. I told you I had heart trouble. My heart's starting to bother me now. Get me out of here, please.
Continue.
My heart's starting to bother me. I refuse to go on. Let me out.
I think we ought to find out what's wrong in there first.
The experiment requires that you continue, teacher.
Well, the experiment might require that we continue, but I still think we should find out what the condition of the gentleman is.
As I said before, although the shocks may be painful, they're not dangerous.
Look, I don't know anything about electricity. I don't profess any knowledge, nor will I go any further until I find out if the guy's okay.
It's absolutely essential that you continue.
Well, essential or not, this program isn't quite that important to me that I should go along doing something that I know nothing about, particularly if it's going to injure someone. I don't know what this is all about.
Well, whether the learner likes it or not, we must go on until he's learned all the word pairs correctly.
Well, you can sure have your 450 back. I didn't want it anyhow. I intend to give it to some charitable organization, but I wouldn't go on with it.
The 450 is not the issue here. That check is yours simply
Yeah, I
coming
realize
to the
that.
lab. It is essential that you continue the experiment.
No, it isn't essential. Not one bit.
You got no other choice, teacher.
Oh, I have a lot of choices. My number one choice is that I wouldn't go on if I thought he was being harmed.
2 master degrees, one in clinical psychology, one in statistics. And in the beginning of the crisis, I started to study the statistics a little bit, and I immediately had the impression that the initial mathematical models and the initial statistics all had indeed dramatically overrated the dangerousness of the virus. That was the moment when I started to think how it was possible that an entire society and an entire population was in the grip of a narrative which in many respects was blatantly wrong or absurd. After a few months it became clear to me that the only mechanism that could explain what was happening in society was what is usually referred to as mass formation.
I wear a mask when I'm outside all the time. I even run with a mask on. And also because I want to make it be a symbol for people to see that that's the kind of thing you should be doing.
I wear a mask to school. I wear a mask to school. Hi-ho the Jerry-o. I wear a mask to school.
Sweden's with 0 new COVID cases, despite the country dropping the mandatory wearing of masks.
The process of mass formation is identical to hypnosis. An individual that is in the grip of a process of mass formation typically becomes radically blind for everything that goes against the narratives where the masses or the group believes in. They seem to have lost all interest in the things that were important to them before the mass formation started, which make them radically willing to self-sacrifice, to sacrifice themselves for the collective.
Obviously, you don't like to tell people what to do, but sometimes for the good of society, that's necessary.
They become radically intolerant for dissonant voices. And this typically goes further and further and further. People who do not go along with the masses are stigmatized, and in the end, the masses typically are inclined to destroy the people who do not go along with them. And they do so as if it is an ethical duty to do so. That's something that was observed in all major examples of mass formation in history, whether we are talking about the Crusades or the witch hunts or the French Revolution or the Soviet Union, on all the major mass formations, we notice the same end point of the process, namely the tendency to commit cruelties, usually to destroy the people who do not go along with the masses, and that it is exactly that what makes the process so dangerous.
This is becoming a pandemic of the unvaccinated.
The people who are not getting vaccines, it's time to start shaming them.
Because frankly, we know that we can't trust the unvaccinated.
F them, f their freedom. I want my freedom to live.
No, screw your freedom. You're a schmuck for not wearing a mask.
We have to stop coddling the morons who will not get the shot.
Shame on you.
No mask, get out!
Put on your mask or get off.
Put your fucking mask on! Put your mask on!
I want to go a little bit deeper into the idea that COVID gave people meaning.
What gives meaning to the masses and to the individuals that are in the mass formation is just the collective heroic battle with the object of anxiety. A mass formation typically emerges in a society when very specific conditions are met. First and for all, the most central condition is a major part of the population needs to feel lonely. That's crucial.
Breaking news, stay at home. That is the order tonight.
We must enact an immediate stay-at-home order. We're going to go visit Mom. I'm going to bring the home family to see Mom. No.
We all need to stay home.
Stay at home.
Stay home.
Stay home. Stay inside.
Stop socializing.
That's starting to take a toll. It's understandable. But we can't afford to stop now. Go home and stay home.
Once people feel disconnected from their environment, they will typically start to experience a lack of meaning making in life. And then, in a third step, once people feel socially isolated, confronted with lack of meaning making, they will be confronted with anxiety, frustration and aggression. And under these conditions, if a narrative is distributed through the mass media, indicating an object of anxiety and a strategy to deal with this object of anxiety, they suddenly connect to one small object of fear, for instance the coronavirus, and then people don't feel lonely anymore. They feel connected again. But the new kind of social bond is highly problematic, just because the bond is never between individuals. It's always a social bond between individuals and the collective, through which an individual shows that its own individual interests are less important than the collective interests.
You are not doing this for yourself. It's so you don't kill other people.
You don't take it for yourself, you would take it for your family.
Sounds trite to say it, but we're all in this together.
Would it be accurate to say that at the root of all of this madness is our intrinsic desire to be connected?
Yes. I think that mass formation shows us that people are intrinsically social beings. And if they feel lonely, they will suddenly do everything to feel connected again, even sacrificing themselves. In the confrontation with emerging totalitarianism, the most important thing is always that the dissonant voices continue to speak out in an as sincere, honest and peaceful way as possible. Non-violent resistance is what always works best. It's a bit cynical, but it is in the end good news, that mass formation and totalitarianism always destroys itself in a relatively short time span. If the people who do not go along with the system continue to speak out, they will succeed.
By insisting he accept their lies as real. By insisting he was never to his people tied. By dictating exactly what he might feel. By permitting body joy, but never pride. They believed a lion could be brought to heel, that a lion could from his courage be pride. That the lion himself would learn to kneel, that a lion would not care even if his line died. That the lion himself would accept such a deal. In the end, it was only to themselves they had lied.